Well, I actually want to talk about your podcast because you have this incredible and incredibly successful, by the way. I've seen on I think it's Good Pods that you were one of the top 100. It's a podcast called Branding Matters, so people should check that out. So I'm curious, why did you decide to launch that? I think it was in 2021, is that right? And then
Yep.
what was the goal?
Well, do you want the long version or the short version?
Bring it. Bring me the long version. Sure.
Okay, I'll tell you the long version. I'll try to make it short.
Okay.
So before I launched, just FYI, I never listened to a podcast, so I knew
Mm.
nothing about it. Never listened to any. And then in September of 2020, I was
Mm.
invited to do a presentation to a networking event, a women's networking event. And then with COVID and we were on lockdown, they asked
Yeah.
me, they said, okay, we have to do it online now. We can't do it in person. So, at the time online, I was like, what? How am I going to present? I love doing presentations,
Yeah.
but I love, I feed off the energy of the audience,
Totally.
right? And so
Totally.
doing it online, I was like, what? And I was going to cancel because I'm like, how am I going to do this?
Yeah.
But I committed to it. So I said, okay, I'll still do it. So I ended up doing this presentation and it was about branding. My background, just quickly, I used to be in advertising. And so I have a
Mhm.
marketing advertising background. And so it was about branding. And then after the event, I had a few people reach out to me, different people, and they basically said the same thing. They're like, "Thank you. I loved your presentation. I worked for a corporate company. I got laid off because of COVID, and I started my own business. And I know my business, but I know nothing about branding. And you said
Yeah.
a lot of things that really resonated with me, and I need help." And they asked me, do you do consulting? And I didn't do consulting. I was busy and
Sure.
so I just sort of said, no, but I can help you whatever you want. And I walked away from that thinking, okay, well, if those are a few people from a small audience and COVID is a global pandemic and a global issue and forced entrepreneurship was a real issue that was happening,
Yeah.
I thought, okay, well, this is obviously something bigger. And I mentioned it to my boyfriend in passing, and it's so funny. And he listens to soccer podcasts and he goes, oh, you should start a podcast. And I was like, yeah, right. I knew nothing about them, like literally. And then I thought, okay, because I like to do things I've never done before. So I said, okay, how hard could it be?
Yeah.
And so I thought about it and then came up with the name Branding Matters. It's a double entendre. So it means, branding matters. If you're a business owner or marketer or entrepreneur and you have a business, you really need to have a brand and you need to have a strong brand. And now more than ever, because branding is all about differentiating yourself, right? And
Yeah.
standing out from your competition. And so how do you do that? It's by your branding and having a strong brand.
Sure.
But then also branding matters in the sense that I want to cover all different topics about branding. So not just limiting it to about branding per se, but everything that has to do with creating a brand, everything from your brand identity, your logo, your colors, your font, to your merch, which is what we do, right? So
Yeah.
all encompassing. So that way I thought I could bring in, and I know what I know and I don't know. I know what I don't know. So
Sure.
I thought, okay, well, I'll bring in experts from all over the world, from all different industries to
Mm.
share their stories and some branding tips that will help my audience create brand equity for their businesses. So that was my goal, honestly. I mean, I know it was a
Yeah.
big, audacious goal, but if you're going to dream big. And so I thought that's what I'm going to do. And just kind of started from nowhere. And sorry, I just want to
Yeah.
add to that because
Yeah.
I think you'll find this interesting. I don't know if you know Marshall Atkinson. Do you know
Hmm.
Marshall
I do.
Atkinson?
Yeah. 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 Marshall's a good
Okay,
guy.
so talk about serendipity. I was, I hadn't yet even launched it or talked about it or anything, and I was on Twitter, and somehow he and I connected. I can't remember. And then he asked me if I would be on his podcast. He has a podcast called Success Stories.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, why do you want me? I'm not a success story. I had a lot of, I told him sort of my story in a nutshell. And he's like, oh, I think you have a great story and I'd love to have you on. And then I said to him, it's funny that you have a podcast because I'm thinking of doing a podcast, but I don't know anything about it. And he was amazing. He said, well, I can help you. And he sort of gave me some tips and some places to start. And yeah, so I actually owe him a lot because he really sort of helped me, propelled me sort of get into the
Mm.
podcast space. And then we went from there. So yeah.